A New York City tenant is furious that the city's rent guidelines board approved a huge 3% rent increase for rent controlled tenants. And he says that he doesn't know how he's going to be able to afford food with the $45 a month increase. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over the decision by the Rent Guidelines Board of New York City to allow rent control landlords to increase their rents by a huge 3%. Okay, it is an absolutely ridiculously low rent increase considering the amount of inflation and how costs have just increased for landlords, especially in a place like New York. Okay, so the costs there have skyrocketed. Inflation around the country was, just last year at 8%, but they're saying, oh, well, landlords can only increase their rents by 3%. So, you know what? Landlords are going to be suffering. They're going to be deferring maintenance. They're going to be deferring capital expenditures. Some of them are going to fall into bankruptcy because they will not be able to handle it. And that is an awful position to be in. And when you read this story, it's kind of ridiculous when you're reading it because the tenants up here are complaining about this minuscule rent increase. Okay, the tenant has no ground to stand on. It has no ground to stand on, considering the fact that, hey, this is reality. This isn't your fantasy world where you can pay the same rent for 30 years. Like, the costs of stuff haven't increased over the last 30 years. No, costs have increased for landlords just like everyone else. So you need to face that fact and accept that this small rent increase is what's going to be happening. Now, for the landlords out there, I feel for you. Okay, I feel for you because this is a bad situation. But I wouldn't have invested in rent control buildings in New York City in the first place. Obviously, there are some landlords who can make this sort of thing work, make a large profit, but I'm not one of them, and most small landlords aren't either. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think. Are you surprised that the tenants are upset with such a minuscule, tiny rent increase? Like I've said before, the only thing these tenants really want is for the rent to either stay the same forever or decline even, okay? They don't live in reality. They live in fantasy land. And in the fantasy land, somehow the landlords, they have this huge, huge pot of money that will last forever and provide them with, the special housing they need that's in perfect shape and perfect condition for a very low price forever. And that's just not reality, okay? It's not reality. So anyway, let's get into this article and see what it says. This article is coming from ny1.com, and it says, tenants, landlords unhappy with vote for rent hike by the Rent Guidelines Board. And obviously the landlords aren't happy with it because it's not going to allow them to even cover the additional expenses that they've incurred over the last year. But the fact that the tenants aren't happy, the tenants won. They won in every single way. The rent increase is so small that it basically isn't even something they'll notice, okay? Yet they're still complaining because once they give these entitlements away, these people, they want, they just will just bleed whoever they're getting this entitlement from. They'll bleed them dry. That is their whole mindset. All right, give, or take. I'm sorry, not give. Take. Never give. So anyway, let's get into the article. Segundo Manuel and his family of four pay about $1,500 a month to rent their small Queens studio apartment. Manuel says they're barely making ends meet. I used to live with my sister, but of course things get complicated, and that's how we ended up here, he said. He expects to be squeezed further with the likelihood that rent is going to go up in his rent-stabilized building, located on 161st Street in Jamaica, following the Rent Guidelines Board vote Wednesday night. The board sets the maximum rent-stabilized landlords can raise rents each year. It's not just rent. It's also food and everything else that's going up with inflation. It's a month-to-month thing, he said. And you realize this guy, he's very low income. Okay, he is very low income. However, when you look at the fact that he said his rent was $1,500 a month, right? And he's getting a 3% increase. What does that add up to? I mean, you can do the math pretty simple. It's $45 a month. So now he's going to be paying $1,545 a month. Oh my goodness. Like if you can't come up with an additional $45 a month, and then you've got a problem. You've got a real problem. Now, I understand you've got a family to feed, but at the same time, this is the reality that people across the country are facing everywhere, except for in these places with rent control. Okay, so you got away very, very, very lucky. It could have easily been if you were in a place like Omaha, Nebraska. If you're paying $1,500 a month, your landlord could come up and be like, "Hey, we're going to have to increase the rent by 20%, and that's $300 a month, okay? And there's nothing illegal about that here. So, yeah, you would have just been out of luck. So, face the facts that, hey, yeah, it's going to cost you a little bit extra every month, but it's not impossible to come up with that $45, even for the lowest of the low income people. And, you're really complaining about what you're really complaining about is the fact that you live in a place that is super duper expensive, and where you're paying $1,500 a month to live in a studio. That's the real issue right there. What you need to do is move. Okay, be further out, be it a different part of the city, be it a different suburb of the city, be it a different city altogether, different state. But you're paying too much to be crammed in here, a family of four living in a crappy studio apartment in New York for $1,500 a month. That is ridiculous. Okay, I mean, you don't have to live there. You don't. Okay, don't blame the landlord that everything is expensive. It's the city's fault. Okay, the city's a very popular place to live. It's the largest city in the entire country. Yeah, it's going to be expensive. It's To make matters worse, he said his apartment is in great disrepair. There is a broken toilet and crumbling bathroom tiles, dangerous electric sockets, leaky ceilings, and mold in the kitchen. Manuel plans to join a tenant lawsuit against his landlord for unsafe conditions, even as they face the possibility of paying more for rent. It blows my mind that these tenants they don't see the correlation here. Okay, they're like, we're paying far below market rents, yet for some reason the landlord doesn't seem to be able to keep up with maintenance and repairs. I can't figure this one out. I mean, doesn't I mean, where do you think the landlord gets the money for the maintenance and repairs? Why do you think the landlord is deferring this maintenance? Because these are rent controlled units, because the rent doesn't cover the cost of the repairs. Okay? That is the result of the policy that you are pushing as a tenant. You're like, I want to live in somewhere where the rent is cheap, and I'll never have a rent increase, right? Well, you're going to be living in a place with what did they say? It was dangerous electric sockets, crumbling bathroom tiles, leaky ceilings, and a broken toilet. That's what you get for cheap rent. Okay? That's what you get when you ask for rent control. You get a place that's falling apart, a dumpster fire, okay? And simply put, if you want a place that's nice, you're going to have to pay market rates. That's the only way. If the landlord can't afford to do maintenance, then he's not going to do maintenance, or he's going to drag his feet with it and delay as long as possible because the expense is too much and he's not making enough money off of the bare minimum 3% rent increase that you're still complaining about. So now you're like, oh, we're going to sue the landlord. Yeah, well, I don't know if you can squeeze water out of a rock. Okay, what I'm basically saying is that you can sue the landlord, but if the landlord doesn't have the money to make the repairs, then they're not going to happen. Gee, man, these people are dumb. There are a total of 30 violations that HPD issued against the landlord of this particular building, Sharman Pianka, an attorney with Queens Legal Services, said. No matter the conditions in Manuel's building or elsewhere throughout the city, landlords of rent-stabilized buildings can demand higher rents on leases signed after September because the Rent Guidelines Board approved a 3% hike on one-year leases and a 2.75 and then 3.2% over two-year leases. However, it's hard to find a landlord who is happy with it. Many feel the hike isn't enough. We are faced with spiking energy costs, property taxes, and skyrocketing insurance premiums, and what was voted on last evening is not sufficient. Michael Tobman, the membership and communications director with the Rent Stabilization Association, said. He's absolutely right. Okay. Why is it that the city can, out of one side of their mouth say, hey, your property taxes are increasing, exponentially, and then on the other side of their mouth they're saying, but we're not going to allow you to charge but 3% additional in rent. I'm like, come on, man, come on. So yeah, it sounds like landlords are getting the short end of the stick here. It sounds like this tenant is just entitled crybaby who needs to, just figure it out, because if he can't afford that $45 a month, he's not going to be set up to basically do anything with the rest of his life.